Music was once the breath, the very soul of Randy Travis, the warm, resonant baritone that accompanied millions of Americans through timeless love songs like Forever and Ever, Amen. For many people, it was not just music, but a place of refuge when life became unbearably heavy. But in 2013, a devastating stroke nearly caused that voice to disappear forever. In a single moment, the man who once could silence an entire auditorium with just one line of song suddenly fell into absolute silence, and it was not only his voice that he lost. Even before that, Randy had already endured a life marked by deep scars. From a childhood of poverty and years lost to theft and delinquency, to a secretive marriage hidden behind the stage lights, and then a downward spiral into alcohol abuse and scandal. Yet the story of Randy Travis does not end in decline. From a place that seemed to offer no path back, he fought against his own body simply to stay alive, and his return to the public eye left millions of viewers stunned into silence. So what losses did Randy Travis have to endure throughout his life? And what was it that allowed him to stand firm after everything? Few would have imagined that the man whose deep baritone once pulled country music away from the hollowness of the 1980s began his life in a cramped farmhouse in North Carolina, where 6 siblings had to share every modest meal just to make it through the day. That man was Randy Bruce Trawick, born on the 4th of May, 1959, in the small town of Nashville. His mother, Bobby, worked relentlessly in a textile factory. Every afternoon when she returned home, her hands were rough and hardened, as if the machines had swallowed parts of her skin. His father, Harold, did whatever jobs could bring in money: construction work, substitute teaching, raising turkeys, breeding horses, anything that could be exchanged for dinner for 6 children. In that household, poverty was not just a lack of money, but the feeling of growing up in a life where you were not allowed to be weak, not allowed to dream, not allowed to slow down. In the midst of poverty, music came to Randy not as a dream, but as a command. His father forced the children to learn singing and music with the same strictness as household chores, leaving no room for whim or spontaneity. As a result, music became both a refuge and a heavy burden pressing down on his childhood. Randy grew up within that contradiction, loving music, yet fearing it, because every wrong note carried a price far greater than simple disappointment. From the age of 8, Randy found his only sanctuary in the local church choir. The church was not grand or luxurious, but to him, it was another world, a world where he was listened to, acknowledged, and allowed to believe that his voice mattered. Among the hymns and the sound of the organ, the fragile voice of a young boy became a lifeline, the only thing pulling him out of the feeling of being submerged by poverty and discipline. Many years later, Randy would admit, music was the only place where I felt I belonged. At the age of 10, when he first held a guitar, Randy felt as though he had discovered a new language, a language that allowed him to express things no one at home had ever taught him how to say. Suppressed emotions, nameless sadness, and anger he dared not show, suddenly all of it had a place to go. Together with his brother Ricky, he formed the Trawick Brothers, performing everywhere from county fairs to bars to smoke-filled clubs where laughter often drowned out their singing. To the crowd, it was nothing more than background music blending into alcohol-fueled chatter. But to Randy, every note was a plea, look at me, listen to me, let me exist. He did not sing to entertain or earn a few spare dollars. He sang like a child, desperately trying to prove that he deserved to live, to be remembered, to be called by name. But when the stage lights went out, reality pressed down immediately. Every morning, Randy had to rise at dawn to work on the farm, tending livestock, raising turkeys. His father was both the man who introduced music into his life and the stern shadow who demanded perfection, where discipline was often accompanied by physical punishment. On Sundays, he sang about faith in church. The other 6 days of the week, he lived like an adult trapped in a child's body, carrying responsibilities and pressures far beyond his years. Later in life, Randy would bitterly admit, I grew up much faster than my age. He never had summer nights chasing fireflies with friends, never had carefree afternoons, never experienced a true childhood. As he entered his teenage years, Randy nearly let go of life altogether. He dropped out of school after 8th grade, and from that moment on, everything began to slide rapidly downhill. Without school, without goals, his days dissolved into nights of wandering and reckless decisions made under the influence of alcohol. In Nashville, people knew Randy not for his talent, but for trouble. He frequently argued with his family, ran away from home, then returned drunk. Alcohol entered his life at the age of 12, and by 14, drugs began to appear. For a period of time, marijuana became a daily companion, and from there, trouble was no longer accidental, it became a way of life. He once took his brother's car and caused an accident, was arrested for drunk driving, once broke into a church just to throw a party, and at another time stole knives and watches from a local store. When stopped by the police, Randy resisted, shouted, and even tried to flee, as if the entire world were chasing him. His police record grew so quickly that in that small town, people no longer needed to ask his name, just seeing his face was enough. There came a point when Randy going in and out of the police station became so routine that no one was surprised anymore. By his 17th birthday, he was arrested for public intoxication. At that moment, prison was no longer a distant warning, but a future waiting just ahead. Later records show that Randy was involved in a string of offenses, from drunk driving and theft to illegal entry and fleeing from police. And at 16, he stood before a court in Charlotte, facing a possible sentence of up to 5 years in prison. No one believed Randy could be saved anymore. And the most frightening part was that he believed it too. Looking back on that period later in life, he did not try to justify himself. He said only one chilling sentence: "I was heading toward prison, not the stage." And then, the moment of fate arrived. In 1975, when Nashville had become far too small for a rebel like Randy, he decided to try his luck at the Country City USA nightclub in Charlotte, less than an hour's drive from home. For most people, it was nothing more than a local talent contest, the kind of event people attended simply for entertainment. But for Randy, it felt like a final gamble. At 17, with the stains of his sins not yet washed away, with a prison sentence seemingly waiting just outside the door, he stepped onto the stage as if stepping onto the edge of a cliff. And then, on a night Randy never expected, everything suddenly slowed down. When he began to sing low, rough, yet heavy with emotion, the noise of the bar gradually faded. Glasses stopped rising, conversations were left unfinished, and for the first time, people truly listened to a teenager standing on that stage. Randy was not just singing. He poured into it his desperation, his longing to be seen, to be acknowledged as someone who had value. And in that very moment, he realized something. Music could save him because his talent was something no one could ignore. Among the fleeting glances in that room that night, there was one person who lingered longer than all the rest. Randy had no idea, but from that moment on, his life had begun to change direction. That person was Elizabeth "Lib" Hatcher, the club's owner. Where others saw only a troubled, unruly teenager, Lib saw what the crowd had missed. Not technique, not luck, but an intense hunger to live, channeled entirely through that voice. Randy was not performing to impress. He was singing as if music were the last rope keeping him from sinking into darkness. And indeed, he was standing very close to that edge. A prison sentence for car theft hung over his head like a blade. One more misstep, and Nashville would swallow him again, this time behind bars. But Lib did not simply applaud and walk away like everyone else. She stepped directly into Randy's life, pulling him out of his own self-destructive orbit. Lib filed a petition with the court to become Randy's legal guardian, posting bail for him and taking personal responsibility for guiding him, as if dragging a child away from a path that had already been set. For a young man who had grown more familiar with the shadow of prison than with the glow of stage lights, this was not merely an opportunity, it was a turning point of fate, a moment that did not just save his future, but kept him tethered to life itself. From that point on, Lib became the single anchor that allowed Randy to stay upright. During the day, she pulled him into the kitchen, made him wash dishes, cook, and learn discipline from the smallest tasks, a kind of discipline that came not with beatings, but with trust. At night, Randy stepped onto the bar's stage with a guitar in his hands, lifted his voice amid the noise, and for the first time in his life, he was allowed to believe that he could become someone. That strange contrast, daytime filled with the smell of grease and stacks of dirty dishes, nighttime bathed in stage lights and applause, became the cradle of Randy's rebirth. At Country City, USA, he began his second chance in the most literal sense. Night by night, song by song, rising again after every mistake, he moved away from the image of a castaway and closer to becoming an artist people truly wanted to hear. By 1978, after years of relentless effort, Lib finally opened the door for Randy to enter a professional recording studio. At the age of 19, carrying the still unhealed scars of an impulsive youth, Randy sat in front of a microphone for the first time at Paula Records. His debut singles Dreaming and She's My Woman were still rough around the edges, his voice not yet fully mature, and they quickly passed through the market without leaving much of a trace. It was then that Randy realized leaving Nashville was only the first step. If he truly wanted to live with music, he had to go to the place where it could decide the course of an entire life: Nashville. In 1982, Randy and Lib left Charlotte, carrying nothing with them but faith and an unfinished dream in the Music City. He took the stage name Randy Ray, and night after night at the Nashville Palace, he stood under the lights, not merely to earn a living, but to assert his place in a world of suffocating competition. From those nightly performances, Randy and Lib scraped together every dollar to place another bet, independently releasing the album live at the Nashville Palace. It was little known and modestly produced, but for Randy, it was his first declaration that he was no longer singing as background noise for other people's pleasure, but singing to claim his right to exist in a world ready to crush anyone who arrived with nothing. It was also during this period that Lib made a decision that would bind Randy's life to hers forever. She divorced her husband, left her family, and devoted her entire life to protecting and caring for him. What began as a chance encounter became a bond of fate, both a source of support and a heavy pressure. Lib was not only his manager. She was the person standing between Randy and the abyss he had once nearly fallen into. Then, in 1986, after nearly a decade of knocking in silence and being repeatedly rejected for being too traditional, Nashville finally listened. Randy was signed, and at that moment, he left behind the name Randy Ray to step forward with a new identity. Randy Travis, borrowing the surname of his idol Merle Travis as a quiet vow to himself. The name change was not merely about sounding better. It felt like a ritual of rebirth, when a young man who had once stood on the edge of prison began to emerge as the new hope of country music. Not long after, his debut studio album Storms of Life was released, and it exploded. Songs like On the Other Hand, Once Upon a Time, and Digging Up Bones swept across America. Randy's warm baritone was not polished, not aligned with the urban country trend, but sincere and deeply felt as if drawn straight from the listener's own life. That authenticity paved the way for the neo-traditional movement, pulling country music back to its roots with steel guitars and stories of love, faith, sorrow, and rural life. Storms of Life quickly achieved multi-platinum status, a rare feat for a debut album at the time, and turned Randy into Nashville's brightest star. The triumph intensified when, later in 1986, he was invited to join the Grand Ole Opry, the sacred temple of country music. At just 27 years old, Randy became one of the youngest artists ever to step onto that revered wooden circle. The moment he sang Hank Williams's "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," remains unforgettable. A young man who once lived on the margins of society now stood beside legends he had only dared to dream of. In 1987, his second album, Always and Forever, was released and went 5 times platinum. All 4 singles became major hits. Too Gone, Too Long, I Won't Need You Anymore, I Told You So, and above all, Forever and Ever. Amen, which soared straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart. Amen. A single word, like fate's final seal. The song transcended the boundaries of a hit to become a hymn of love and faith, echoing through thousands of weddings, churches, and the memories of generations as an eternal vow. By the end of the 1980s, Randy was no longer a fleeting phenomenon. He had become the voice of an entire generation, a man who once stood at the edge of prison, now standing in the glow of the stage lights. And if the early storms had lifted him to the summit, then 8 by 10 inches, 1988, was the quiet but decisive confirmation. Randy Travis did not arrive only to disappear, he stayed. As the decade drew to a close, critics finally acknowledged what audiences had long felt. Randy Travis did not merely sing country music, he revived it. A genre once dismissed as outdated suddenly felt intimate, capable of touching deeply human emotions. 8 by 10 reached multi-platinum not through trends or gimmicks, but through something increasingly rare in the industry: authenticity. In 1989, Randy continued forward with nothing left to prove. Hard Rock Bottom of Your Heart held the #1 position for 4 consecutive weeks, yet its true value lay beyond the charts. In that voice, listeners did not hear a star narrating a love story, but a man daring to open himself up, laying his own fractures before the public. In 1990, heroes and friends arrived like a handshake across history. George Jones, B. King, Loretta Lynn, icons did not appear to elevate Randy, but to stand beside him as an equal. From a boy once rejected, Randy stepped into the world of legends on the strength of his own voice. And just 1 year later, High Lonesome closed that golden chapter with a deep, resonant note. In this album, the ancient sorrow of country music resurfaced the melancholy once carried by Hank Williams or Merle Haggard, now resonating through a new voice, where the past was not repeated, but reborn in another era's form. Randy Travis's greatest achievement does not lie in platinum records or Billboard numbers. What was truly extraordinary was his ability to carry country music beyond its own borders. On tours across Europe and Asia, where many listeners did not fully understand the lyrics, audiences still rose to their feet when Forever and Ever, Amen rang out, because emotion needs no translation. In that moment, country music ceased to be the sound of the American South alone. It became the voice of people weary of glitter and spectacle, searching for a voice that did not pretend to be strong. By the late 1990s, Randy Travis stood at a rare peak. More than 50 songs on the Billboard charts, 16 #1 hits. Yet behind those cold numbers lay a profound paradox. The man once deemed beyond saving had become the one who led an entire genre back to its roots. At the same time, another door quietly opened, not in the recording studio, but in front of the camera. What drew filmmakers to Randy was not his fame, but what cinema always seeks: a genuine face, a real voice, and a man who had endured too many collisions to ever pretend. That baritone did not need to learn how to convey experience, it carried it naturally in every breath. His gentle features, calm demeanor, and southern simplicity created a rare sense of authenticity. In the television series Matlock, Randy appeared with almost no need to act. He simply stood there, and audiences believed. He did not rely on technique, he used his own life. From television, Randy moved into other film projects and unexpectedly found a fitting place. Wind in the Wire, 1993, mirrored his own journey. A country singer pulled back to his roots, as if fate were testing whether he had forgotten where he came from. A Holiday to Remember, 1995, offered a gentler tone, rich with family warmth and small-town memories. emotions Randy understood through experience, not imagination. By Black Dog 1998, acting alongside Patrick Swayze, Randy proved he could hold his ground on the big screen. No flashy roles, just a serious, grounded man, the kind of character audiences look at and trust. The film did not make him a Hollywood star, but it etched one thing clearly. Randy Travis was an artist unafraid to step beyond his comfort zone. Even so, cinema was only a detour. Music remained Randy's lifeblood. Entering the 2000s, as traditional country tilted toward pop, he chose a different path, quieter and deeper. Faith, not a stylistic shift, but a way to save himself. Randy often said it was Christian faith that held him together in his darkest times, like an invisible rope pulling a man back from the abyss. From that point on, he sang as an act of gratitude. Rise and Shine 2002 was not loud, not a declaration of comeback, but a quiet statement that he was still here only singing for a different reason. On that album, 3 Wooden Crosses became a defining milestone. The story of 4 people on a fateful bus ride, 3 wooden crosses left by the roadside, was delivered in Randy's voice with a chilling simplicity. The song climbed to #1 and earned the CMA Song of the Year, reminding Nashville that he had never faded away, he was simply existing on a deeper level. In the years that followed, Randy continued to slow his pace, but he never abandoned music. Around the Bend 2008 marked the return of a man who had known both glory and loss. His voice was no longer as sharp as in his youth, but warmer and heavier, something only time can create. Listeners no longer saw a star, but a man in conversation with his own life. In 2009, the moment Randy performed I Told You So as a duet with Carrie Underwood brought all of Nashville to silence. One voice belonged to a radiant new generation, the other to an icon who had traveled nearly the entire road. When the 2 voices merged, it ceased to be a performance. It became a meeting between past and present. That performance earned Randy a Grammy Award, a confirmation that his voice still mattered, regardless of time. Then, in 2013, a severe stroke took away what was most precious to him: the ability to sing. From that moment on, the battle was no longer on stage, but in everyday life. Together with his wife, Mary Davis, Randy searched for ways to keep music alive, not to shine, but not to disappear. Gospel recordings were released again as a quiet message. Faith had never left him, and music could still sustain a human being even after the body had lost so much. In 2020, Precious Memories, Worship, and Faith arrived not as a grand statement, but enough for fans to understand Randy Travis was still there. While music continued to resonate before the public, behind the curtain, Randy's private life was beginning to fracture. From the very beginning, Elizabeth Libhatcher did far more than manage Randy. She took hold of his life itself. From kitchen work during the day to the stage at night, she was at once strict, like a teacher, and the sole pillar Randy had little choice but to cling to. Over time, the boundary between work and intimacy blurred, turning into a discreet relationship they tried hard to keep hidden from the press. In 1991, after more than a decade together, they married in secret. Their silence, however, became fuel for scrutiny. The 18-year age gap was exaggerated, followed by malicious rumors that the marriage was a sham, that Randy was gay, even insinuations linking him to HIV, AIDS spreading like a stain that would not wash away. At times, Randy was so furious he wanted to sue, but in the end, he chose the path most familiar to him, letting music speak in his place. For nearly 2 decades, Lib was simultaneously his wife, his manager, and the keeper of the keys to his career. There was only one absence they could not fill. They had no children. In the large house, after the love songs and the hymns faded, a quiet emptiness remained. And over the years, closeness turned into constraint. Randy longed for a private life, while Lib continued to see him as a project to be controlled. What had once been the key to success gradually became a set of chains. In 2010, after nearly 20 years, they divorced, ending not only a marriage, but also the partnership that had lifted him from obscurity to the peak of fame. Randy lost his wife, lost his manager, and most painfully of all, lost his sense of home. That marriage began with faith, was sustained by sacrifice, and ended in silence. It was precisely that emptiness that pushed Randy into another unstable chapter where he easily slipped away from his last remaining anchor. During that period, alcohol returned not for pleasure, but to fill the growing voids inside him. For Randy, it was not rebellion, but a misguided escape from things he no longer had the strength to face. Then 2012 became a stain difficult to erase. In February, Randy was arrested for public intoxication in a parking lot. On its own, it sounded minor. But just a few months later, in August, everything collapsed in a far more brutal way. He was arrested for driving under the influence, causing an accident, and losing control to the point of threatening officers at the scene. The man who once sang 3 wooden crosses like a prayer suddenly appeared in headlines not for music, but for his downfall. The $21,000 bail was just a number. The real cost was the severe damage to his reputation, the disappointed looks from those who had once seen him as a symbol of faith and discipline. Randy tried to prevent the release of the police body cam footage, as if hiding that moment might preserve the last fragments of his dignity. But in 2017, the court ruled against him, and the video still spread. For fans, it was a chilling shock watching a figure of resilience exposed in his most vulnerable state, like a man sinking with nothing left to hold on to. Later, Randy did not make excuses. He simply admitted, "I fell, and that fall taught me humility." And just when people thought Randy had hit bottom, fate pulled him even deeper. In July 2013, he was diagnosed with viral myocarditis, a silent yet ruthless illness, like a thief slowly destroying him from within. The heart that once kept time for millions of listeners suddenly turned against its own owner. Randy collapsed. Not long after, a massive stroke struck, plunging his body into paralysis. Doctors were forced to place him in a medically induced coma, fighting for each breath. At times, just as he stabilized, he slipped back into another coma. His lungs collapsed, his blood pressure dropped, the numbers on the monitors flickered relentlessly, cold reminders that time was running out. In a room heavy with the scent of disinfectant, there came a moment when hope was nearly erased. Only a 1% chance of survival. A number so small it is often used to say it is time to let go. But the story did not end there. After 5 months that felt like an entire lifetime, Randy opened his eyes. That return, however, resembled no comeback anyone had ever known. There was no stage, no microphone, no applause waiting ahead. Instead, there was a foreign body, one that could not speak, could not sing, could not even stand unaided. The man who once stood before thousands now had to start again from zero, learning to form distorted syllables, practicing lifting his legs with a support frame, trembling as he placed his hand on guitar strings as if touching music for the very first time. Randy later admitted bitterly, "I felt like a prisoner in my own body." And then, from 2014 to 2015, every day of Randy's life was a quiet battle. He had to relearn things that once seemed simple, bending each finger, lifting a hand, struggling to stand only to collapse again. Some days, merely writing his own name was enough to exhaust him completely. Tears fell not from pain, but from helplessness, when what had once been instinct became trials he had to pay for with every ounce of willpower he possessed. And by his hospital bed during that time was Mary Davis, a longtime friend who appeared precisely in the space no one else could fill. She sat beside him day after day, holding his cold hands, reading the Bible, playing old recordings, as if to remind him that the man named Randy Travis was still there, even as his body was breaking apart, piece by piece. From companionship in the shadow of death, their friendship slowly transformed into something deeper. In 2015, they married no lavish gowns, no dazzling lights. That marriage was not meant to change Randy, nor to fully heal what had been broken, but simply to accept the man he had become and continue living together, slowly, but no longer alone. In 2016, the world fell silent when Randy Travis was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Mary supported him as she guided him onto the stage amid applause not only meant to celebrate, but to help hold up a body that had endured too much loss. Then, in a moment no one expected, Randy leaned toward the microphone and whispered a few notes of amazing grace. His voice trembled, broken and fragile, no longer carrying the power it once had, yet the entire hall burst into tears. That was not a performance. It was proof that he was still alive.
I sail around, hide me.
After that moment, Randy chose a slower rhythm of life. In 2019, he and Mary left Nashville, closing a chapter that had been both glorious and chaotic, to begin again in Texas. It was not an escape, but a lesson in how to live once the lights had gone out. Though he could no longer sing as before, music still found a way to remain through restored archival recordings, as if preserving a part of a soul that had not yet departed. In 2024, the song Where That Came From was released, born from stored recordings and voice restoration technology. Listeners did not just hear a new song, they heard a reply from a man who had once been told he had only a 1% chance of survival. In early 2025, Horses in Heaven followed, resonating like a small hymn, reminding us that some voices do not need a whole body in order to exist. In March 2025, at the 100th anniversary celebration of the Grand Ole Opry, Carrie Underwood invited Randy onto the stage. He did not sing, he did not speak. He simply bowed his head and whispered a single word. Amen. Not a declaration of victory, but an act of acceptance, that life may not end in glory, yet it can still close in peace. Today, Randy lives quietly at the Chrysalis Ranch in Texas, where his days pass with the simplest of tasks, practicing speech, learning to walk again, keeping his breathing steady when his body no longer always obeys him. Some days, everything cooperates. On others, even the smallest movement becomes a challenge. He has learned to accept this new rhythm of life rather than fight against it. By his side, Mary remains a quiet anchor, a constant reminder that sometimes simply being allowed to stay in this life is already a gift. From everything he has been through, Randy has gradually turned his life towards something else, staying behind to help those who are quietly fighting, just as he once did. The foundation bearing Randy Travis's name was created not to showcase or seek recognition, but to support heart patients, stroke survivors, and children who lack access to music, his way of giving back the extra time that life granted him. When people look back at the legacy of Randy Travis, they realize he never tried to become a legend. He simply sang with rare sincerity, and that very honesty revived the flow of traditional country music in the 1980s, opening the door for an entire generation of artists who followed. His songs were not meant merely to be heard, but to be lived with across the years. And perhaps the greatest thing Randy left behind is not found on charts or in awards hanging on walls, but in the way he fell and continued to remain present in life, without needing to stand at the very top anymore. For some destinies do not close with thunderous applause, but with a quiet presence, and it is precisely that which leaves us breathless. Looking back on the life of Randy Travis, one understands that this was never the story of a lucky star, but the journey of a human being who kept falling and standing up in different ways until he could no longer stand tall, yet still chose to stay with life. Perhaps what makes this story resonate with us does not lie in hit songs or awards, but in a feeling that is deeply familiar, the feeling of someone who once lost their way, once made mistakes, once believed every door had closed, and still tried to take one more step the next day. And if that voice, even no longer whole, leaves you silent for a few seconds, please leave a like as a quiet gesture of gratitude. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. And if you wish to continue walking alongside journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that stories that seem to have faded into silence can still be told.